Imagine closing on a prime piece of commercial real estate. Millions of dollars change hands, the ink dries, and, well, the keys are yours.
Right, the perfect transaction.
Yeah, exactly. But then a year later, the federal government just knocks on your door and they inform you that a dry cleaning business that operated on that exact spot back in like 1983 leaked toxic chlorinated solvents into the dirt.
Which is a nightmare scenario.
Oh, an absolute nightmare, because those chemicals have been slowly migrating toward the municipal water supply for decades. And because you hold the deed to that dirt today, you are legally obligated to pay for the multi-million-dollar cleanup.
Every single cent of it.
Right, every cent. You didn't spill the chemicals. I mean, you didn't even know that dry cleaner existed. But the government, they don't care.
They really don't. And, that is the unforgiving reality of environmental liability in commercial real estate. We tend to view property transactions as acquiring an asset.
Yeah, an investment.
Yeah, but depending on the history of the soil beneath that building, you might actually be acquiring a massive retroactive debt. And navigating that hidden landscape, it requires a very specific kind of diagnostic precision.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a formidable stack of intelligence today. I mean, we've got federal registers, EPA legal advisories, new rule summaries, and some highly technical breakdowns from environmental engineering firms.
It's a dense stack for sure.
Yeah, but our objective is to deconstruct this critical, really monumental shift in Phase I environmental site assessments. Specifically, we're looking at the transition to the new ASTM E1527-21 standard and the sudden integration of forever chemical regulations.
And we are speaking directly to you today, the Chief Marketing Officer at Envirogyn.
Exactly. We know the mission of your veteran-owned firm. You deliver tactical compliance and remediation solutions across Houston, Galveston, and Brazoria County.
Right, your brand is built on military-grade discipline, clarity, speed, and a huge commitment to public health. So the intelligence we are synthesizing today is essentially your playbook.
Yeah, because understanding the exact scientific and, well, legal nuances of these regulatory shifts is how you position Envirogyn site assessments, not just as regulatory checkboxes, but as essential legal armor for your clients.
I love that term, legal armor. Because before we analyze the new armor, we really have to understand the modern battlefield. The entire concept of a Phase I environmental site assessment exists because of a piece of legislation passed back in 1980.
Right, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act.
Which is a mouthful, so most people just call it CERCLA, or the Superfund law.
Yeah, CERCLA. And Congress designed CERCLA to address abandoned hazardous waste sites, and they gave it incredibly sharp teeth.
Oh, very sharp. The law authorizes the federal government to respond to releases of hazardous substances and seek immediate reimbursement for the cleanup.
And the mechanism they use to assign that financial burden, that is what terrifies commercial buyers. Because under CERCLA, liability is strict, joint, and several.
Let's break down those legal terms because they are literally the foundation of your client's anxiety.
Right. So strict liability means fault is irrelevant. The EPA doesn't have to prove you acted negligently at all.
Right. If the hazardous substance is on your property, you are liable, period.
Exactly. And then joint and several means the government can go after any single potentially responsible party for the entire cost of the cleanup.
Regardless of their proportional share of the blame. It's wild.
It is. It creates a scenario where the current owner is just the most visible, accessible target for the EPA.
Yeah, they're the one holding the bag. And
Yeah.
the only way a buyer can secure immunity from that retroactive liability is by qualifying for specific landowner liability protections, or LLPs, outlined by the EPA.
Like the innocent landowner defense, right?
Yeah, the innocent landowner or the contiguous property owner or the bona fide prospective purchaser defense. But the government doesn't just hand out that immunity on good faith.
No, of course not. You have to earn it. A buyer has to conduct what's called all appropriate inquiries, or AAI, before they ever sign the purchase agreement.
Right, they have to actively investigate the environmental history of the property. And the EPA recognizes the ASTM Phase I Environmental Site Assessment Standard as the official customary practice to satisfy that AAI requirement.
So selling a Phase I ESA is literally selling a map to the minefield. It's how you prove you looked for the mines before you bought the land.
Exactly. But here's the catch. For almost a decade, environmental professionals relied on a standard known as ASTM E1527-21. That was the established blueprint.
Right, the 2013 standard.
Yeah, but science advances and regulatory scrutiny tightens. So ASTM International eventually released an updated, far more rigorous standard, E1527-21.
The 2021 standard. And the EPA formally reviewed it, and after a brief transition period, the grace period just vanished.
Completely. As of February 13, 2024, the old standard lost all of its compliance status.
Wow. So E1527-21 is now the absolute only recognized standard for meeting all appropriate inquiries under federal law. The old maps are officially useless.
Totally useless.
Yeah.
And looking through the technical breakdowns in our sources, this wasn't just a minor administrative update where they changed the font and updated some definition.
They fundamentally tightened the rules of engagement here. I mean, the Tutter line for executing an assessment is now dictated by an incredibly aggressive, unforgiving ticking clock.
Yeah, the viability of a phase-I report has a strict shelf life of exactly 180 days.
180 days.
Right. And what the E1527-21 standard did was clarify exactly when that 180-day countdown begins.
This is huge.
It does not start on the date the final polished report is handed to the client. The clock starts the moment the very first critical task is performed by the environmental professional.
Wait, let me push back on the logistics of that for a second. Because the sources list those critical tasks as, the interviews with past or present owners, the review of government records, the physical visual inspection of the property, or the declaration by the environmental professional.
Right, those are the core components.
So if your tactical team at Envirogyn goes out and interviews a past owner on day one, but, I don't know, the complex laboratory data and final report compilation takes 45 days.
Which often can.
Then the client has already burned through a quarter of their legal protection timeline before they've even read the executive summary. I mean, that sounds like a bureaucratic trap designed to force buyers to pay for continuous updates.
It sounds punishing, I agree, but it is actually a reflection of physical and administrative reality. The environment is not static.
Okay, fair.
A commercial property can suffer a massive chemical spill in the blink of an eye. Or a new restrictive environmental lead can be filed against a deed on a Tuesday afternoon. The EPA demands current, actionable intelligence.
So relying on a 6-month-old visual inspection is basically like relying on weather data from last season to plan a military deployment.
That is a perfect way to put it. Furthermore, the new standard requires the final report to explicitly list the specific dates each of those critical components was executed.
So you can't hide it.
No, it makes the exact expiration date painfully obvious to lenders, regulators, and buyers.
Okay, I see the underlying logic now. The environment moves fast, so the intelligence gathering has to move faster. And for you, as the CMO of Envirogyn, this tight 180-day window is actually a massive strategic advantage.
Oh, absolutely.
Because your brand values speed and military-grade precision. When the clock is that unforgiving, commercial real estate developers simply cannot afford a sluggish consulting firm that takes weeks to synthesize field data.
Exactly. You can position Envirogyn as the rapid deployment force that guarantees swift report turnaround, ensuring clients secure their closing dates without their legal armor expiring mid-transaction.
That's a huge selling point. And you can also leverage the standard's strict clarification regarding what they call the user's responsibility.
Right, because E1527-21 explicitly draws a line between what the environmental professional is required to do and what the buyer, who is the user of the report, must do.
Yeah, the sources emphasize that searching for environmental liens and activity and use limitations, or AULs, via title searches, that is a mandatory requirement placed squarely on the buyer.
Right. An environmental consultant simply running a check on a standard environmental database does not satisfy this legal requirement.
Yeah.
The buyer has to review actual transaction-related title insurance documentation or commission specialized title search reports.
And unless the buyer explicitly contracts the environmental firm to take on that burden, the responsibility just remains with the client.
And if they fail to conduct those specific title searches, their all-appropriate inquiries process is incomplete.
Meaning their legal liability shield crumbles. So this is another point of friction you can eliminate for your clients. Envirogyn can market a comprehensive, we leave no man behind package. You integrate the title searches and the AUL investigations directly into your workflow.
Yeah, you provide a seamless, consolidated operation that guarantees absolute AAI compliance without forcing the client to play middleman with a title company.
Exactly. Securing that administrative perimeter is crucial, but the sources also point out that the E1527-21 standard drastically expanded the physical and historical perimeter of the reconnaissance too.
Yeah, environmental professionals are now mandated to dive much deeper into the past. They must review specific standard historical sources, like aerial photographs, fire insurance maps, local street directories, topographic maps.
Tracing the property's history all the way back to 1940, right? Or its very first developed use, whichever comes first.
Yeah, the level of forensic archaeology required there is just staggering. But the standard doesn't just force your team to look backward, it forces them to look sideways.
Sideways. Look at the neighbors.
Exactly. This intensive historical review must now explicitly include adjoining properties, not just the subject property.
Oh, wow. So you have to research the neighbors back to 1940, too.
Yeah, and the EPA makes a specific point to single out retail properties in this expanded scope. In the past, a consultant might have focused their deep historical dives purely on heavy manufacturing or industrial zones, assuming those presented the highest risk.
Which makes intuitive sense.
Right, but consider a standard retail strip mall. Back in the 1980s, one of those storefronts might have housed a dry cleaner.
Ah, right. And dry cleaners historically relied heavily on perchloroethylene, or PRC, which is an incredibly harsh, volatile, chlorinated solvent.
And those solvents don't respect property lines. So when a dry cleaner has a minor leak out the back door over a decade, that PRC seeps through the concrete, hits the soil, and eventually reaches the groundwater.
And once it hits the water table, it creates a toxic plume that slowly migrates horizontally.
It travels right under the fence line, so it doesn't matter if your client's owned property was a pristine bookstore since 1950.
Right. If the neighboring foxhole had a chemical leak 30 years ago, that invisible plume is quietly seeping under their foundation today.
Exactly. So by highlighting this expanded adjoining property perimeter in your marketing, you communicate the absolute necessity of Envirogyn's boots-on-the-ground approach. You don't just secure the building in question, you secure the entire theater of operations.
That's a great angle. And to map that theater accurately, the sources show that E1527-21 refined the logic diagram for classifying hazards. It removes the ambiguity of older assessments.
Yeah, the core definition of a recognized environmental condition, or REC, was really sharpened up. It now centers entirely on the word likely.
Right. Our REC is defined as the presence or the likely presence of hazardous substances or petroleum products due to a release or a likely release.
Which forces the environmental professional to rely heavily on their field experience rather than just visual confirmation. I mean, if your team discovers an unlined stained chemical pit out back, they don't need to physically see the liquid dripping into the aquifer to call it a REC.
No, their scientific expertise dictates that a release is highly likely.
Exactly. And the standard categorizes these findings into very distinct buckets, which completely changes how a property is valued and managed.
Let's walk through those buckets. So standard RECs signify current contamination or a direct threat of a release.
Right. Then you have controlled RECs, or CREs. A CREC means a past release was addressed to the satisfaction of regulatory authorities, but the contamination wasn't entirely removed.
Okay, so some of it remains in place, but it's managed by institutional or engineering controls.
Like an engineered concrete cap poured over contaminated soil, or a strict land use restriction that legally prevents anyone from ever digging a basement on that lot.
Got it. And you contrast that with historical RECs, or HRECs, where a past release was entirely remediated to unrestricted residential use standards.
Right, the soil was dug up, hauled away, and the site is functionally pristine.
So from a marketing perspective, explaining the difference between a CREC and an HREC to a developer is vital, because a CREC means the client is buying a property with an ongoing management obligation.
Exactly. That concrete cap has to be maintained and monitored.
Which is an ongoing relationship they need with an environmental firm like Envirogyn long after the initial transaction closes.
Great point. But what happens when the intelligence gathering hits a wall? Say your team is digging through local street directories from 1955, and the records were destroyed in a flood. You just have a blank spot on the map.
The standard classifies that as a significant data gap. Both older and newer standards require consultants to identify data gaps, but E1527-21 is incredibly strict about how they're handled.
Right. If a data gap is deemed significant, meaning it actively hinders the professional's ability to determine if a REC exists, they must formally document it in the findings.
They have to explain exactly why the missing information affects their conclusion. One of the engineering sources refers to these significant data gaps as giant question marks.
You can't just shrug, write data unavailable, and move on.
No, you have to clearly highlight the blind spot to the client. It's about offering absolute transparent clarity in a highly regulated environment.
But as complex as mapping historical data and adjoining properties is, the sources point to an even more urgent, scientifically demanding update. The entire landscape of environmental due diligence fundamentally fractured when it comes to invisible threats.
Let's talk about vapor, because the standard draws a very hard, specific line here between vapor migration and vapor intrusion.
Yeah, it includes the assessment of vapor migration, which is the movement of contaminated vapors through subsurface media, like soil and groundwater.
Okay, but it explicitly excludes vapor intrusion. Intrusion being the physical mechanism where those vapors actually seep up from the beat and enter the indoor air of the building itself.
Right.
But why the distinction? If it's in the soil under the building, isn't it the same problem?
Scientifically, they require completely different diagnostic approaches. Buildings often act like giant vacuums. Yeah, due to temperature differences in HVAC systems, they create negative pressure, a phenomenon known as the stack effect. This pressure actively pulls soil gas through microscopic cracks in the foundation.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that.
Assessing the health and safety risks of humans breathing those vapors inside a break room requires separate, highly specialized risk assessments, often involving separate guidance entirely, like ASTM E1527-21.
Because certain chemicals like trichloroethylene or TCE present severe, immediate health impacts from even short-term exposure via vapor intrusion.
Very severe.
So as a CMO, you must ensure your clients understand exactly what shield they're purchasing. A standard phase IESA maps the threat in the ground, but it doesn't test the air the employees are breathing.
Exactly. But, vapor isn't even the most disruptive, invisible threat we found in the intelligence today.
Not even close. The entire industry is currently scrambling to adapt to emerging contaminants.
Specifically, per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS.
Universally known as forever chemicals.
Right. Because the carbon-fluorine bond is one of the strongest in organic chemistry, they do not naturally break down in the environment. And worse, they bioaccumulate in the human body.
Now, when the E1527-21 standard was first published, it treated PFAS as non-scope considerations. They were categorized alongside things like asbestos, radon, and mold.
Because they hadn't been officially designated as hazardous substances under CERCLA by the EPA yet, so evaluating them was strictly an optional business risk.
It was not required to achieve all appropriate inquiries. That was the rule, past tense.
Past tense is right, because April 19, 2024 is a watershed moment for commercial real estate.
On that date, the EPA issued a final rule officially designating two specific widely used PFAS compounds, PFOA and PFOS, as CERCLA hazardous substances.
And the moment that rule hit the Federal Register, the dominoes fell. Instantaneously.
Instantaneously, because the ASTM standard dictates that any substance defined as hazardous under CERCLA must be evaluated. So PFAS immediately shifted from being an optional non-scope issue to a mandatory, strictly regulated component of the Phase I ESA evaluation.
Let's consider the terrifying scale of this for a commercial developer. How is an environmental firm supposed to account for forever chemicals that are literally everywhere?
Seriously. I mean, I know Envirogyn handles military-grade operations, so you are highly familiar with AFFF, the aqueous film-forming foam used to put out jet fuel fires on Air Force bases.
Right, that stuff is loaded with PFAS.
Loaded with it, but PFAS are also in waterproof jackets, fast food wrappers, industrial lubricants, non-stick pans. I mean, they are ubiquitous in modern manufacturing.
They're everywhere.
So how does REC ever get defined in a context where the contaminant might literally be trace amounts of a waterproof coating from an old cafeteria? Does that trigger $1 million cleanup?
And that is the exact pain point agonizing the commercial real estate market today. The answer relies entirely on professional judgment. It is no longer a simple checklist exercise.
So the environmental professional really has to evaluate the specific historical operations of the site.
Exactly. Did it manufacture chemicals? Was it a metal plating facility which heavily utilized PFAS as fume suppressants? Was it an airport or a military installation that regularly deployed AFFF?
They have to determine if there is a likely presence due to a release to the environment, as opposed to just ambient background levels from everyday consumer products.
Yes. And precisely assessing that difference requires deep toxicological understanding and authoritative scientific confidence.
Because a legacy consulting firm relying on outdated templates might accidentally blow up a multi-million-dollar real estate deal by flagging trace non-actionable background levels as a REC simply out of an abundance of caution.
Or worse, they might miss a legitimate plume entirely.
Right, and this is your ultimate science-backed marketing hook. Envirogyn possesses the technical expertise to navigate this chaotic new frontier.
You have the high-tech, modern operational capacity to assess a PFAS REC with integrity and precision, guiding clients through an invisible minefield without causing unnecessary panic or leaving them exposed.
Because the market is currently saturated with uncertainty, clients are actively seeking authoritative guides who understand both the bleeding edge of the science and the brutal reality of the law.
Let's synthesize the strategic value of this deep dive. Your mission is providing tactical, rigorous environmental compliance to the Gulf Coast.
And by translating the complex legalities of CERCLA's strict liability, the unforgiving 180-day ticking clock of the new ASTM E1527-21 standard, and the sudden mandatory reality of PFAS integration, you can position Envirogyn perfectly.
Your messaging isn't about helping a developer check a box to satisfy a bank loan. You are offering urgent, clear, tactical guidance.
You are the high-contrast, authoritative armor your clients desperately need to maintain their operational readiness and protect their financial future.
But, returning to our opening scenario of the retroactive legal debt, there is one final, unsettling implication of these new rules to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, CERCLA liability is strict, joint, several, and retroactive. You are liable for past contamination. But PFAS were only officially designated as a hazardous substance by the EPA in April 2024.
Right, just recently.
So what happens to all the commercial, industrial, and retail properties purchased before that date?
Oh, wow.
Do their old Phase I ESAs, which legally ignored forever chemicals because they were non-scope at the time, do those old reports still protect them from a PSAS-related CERCLA lawsuit today?
That is a terrifying thought.
Or is there a massive untapped market of past buyers out there across Houston, Galveston, and Brazoria County who suddenly have a gaping hole in their legal armor and urgently need a firm like Envirogyn to reassess their legacy liability before the EPA comes knocking?
A map to a minefield is only good if it shows all the explosives. If the map was drawn before April 2024, it is entirely missing the invisible forever chemicals. That is a powerful, highly profitable reality to explore. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.